Good afternoon. My name is David Plazas. I am the Opinion and Engagement Director for the USA Today Network Tennessee and the Tennessean. Today I have the pleasure of interviewing Jim Shulman, Councilman at Large for Metro Nashville, and he's also a candidate for Vice Mayor. There's a special election happening on August 2nd, and the reason, of course, is earlier this year, Mayor Megan Barry resigned. Vice Mayor David Riley assumed that position and then won it outright in a special election in May. And Sherry Weiner is currently the acting vice mayor. Jim Shulman is running for this position, and we should first start by, first of all, what does the vice mayor do, and why do you want to do it?
So, good question. The vice mayor actually runs the meeting. If you ever watch the Metro Council, you will see the vice mayor up there reading the bills and the resolutions and actually conducting the meeting. That's primarily the role of the vice mayor. That you see. The vice mayor also picks the committees and picks the committee chairs. But I think the vice mayor can actually do much more. And I think David Riley, when he served as vice mayor, was heavily engaged in the issues. So part of it is understanding what's going on in the city, making sure that the issues are getting in front of the council and that council members know what's happening in the city. Serving as kind of also a connector between the council and the mayor's office and the department heads within Metro. So a lot of things the vice mayor can do. One last thing I think the vice mayor can do, and really always encourage the vice mayors to do this, and that is to make sure that during the running of the meetings that the public, particularly the people who are sitting in the chamber, but also the people who are watching on television, understand kind of what's happening, understand why maybe procedurally things are going on, that type of thing. Most people really do understand kind of what happens with local government because they know they can reach out and touch it, whether it's a pothole or whether it's an ordinance about people driving on the street. People feel a connection to local government. And so, surprisingly, a lot of people do watch the Metro Council, and I think it's helpful for them to understand what we're doing.
So we just met with the editorial board just a few minutes ago, and what dominated the discussion was the budget.
Right.
How we got here, because I think you've probably heard the same calls from folks saying, how is it that Nashville's so prosperous, yet Metro Nashville government can't pay its bills, can't pay its employees, what happened? How did we get here, and how can we avoid being in this position again?
So for the first 2 years of this budget, of this council term, we had significant increases in revenue. And so we used those revenues to do more and more things. But there were some of us on the council that were a little bit concerned. I think at one point I asked, are we planning for a recession? And the reason to ask that is that in our country, as we all know, we go through cycles. So, we love that uptick, but at some point it's going to come back down. So the question is, are we protecting ourselves for future problems? Well, we haven't had a recession, but we ran into a budget problem. There were a series of factors that all came into play, some of which we fully understand and some of which we don't. Using one-time resources to fund recurring expenses gets you in trouble. And we have to be very, very careful about that. There was still the question about some of the property assessments that we're working through. I know the Board of Education miscalculated on the number of students that they were going to have in the past year. That hurt us financially. Series of things. Some of which, again, we still don't know. So I will tell you that one of the things I would do as Vice Mayor is continue the discussion about last year's budget. So next year's budget doesn't have to be passed until next June. But the problems didn't go away. We passed a budget, but a number of the same problems we had this past budget year are going to be sitting there in the next budget year. And so I've been saying that really the review of next year's budget, which would be the 2020 budget, because we just passed the 2019 budget, the review of the 2020 budget actually should start right now. And the budget committee, members of the council, should be fully engaged in looking back, understanding what's happening, what happened before, and then understanding what may happen in the next year's budget. So we'll be ready when we get the mayor's budget in May of next year.
Now, for you, obviously you're in the competition. There's two other candidates.
Right.
What do you say? What are the things that distinguish you from the other candidates that you think would make you the better vice mayor?
So I've been a district council member. I was one for 8 years, and now I've been a council member at large for almost 3 years. So I have a good perspective on both from a district council member standpoint and from a city at large. When David Briley was the vice mayor, he appointed me as chairman of the Rules Committee. So I know the rules, and I know how to run the meetings with those rules. I'm also, what I would say is, spent 30 years almost outside of the Metro Council in public service. In those years, I've learned from a lot of very, very good people. And you take that experience in terms of building consensus. So I learned from some of the people who have been around state government and local government for years. And there was a time not too long ago where people did bring people from either different sides of the aisle or different perspectives to the table to come up with solutions. That's one of the things that I can do. I've done it before. I've done it pretty much all my career, and I've tried to do it on the council. And that is, if you can't get people to come to the table and at least work on an agreement, you're going to have trouble getting solutions to problems. And as great a city as we have in Nashville, there are problems out there, whether it's affordable housing or traffic congestion or dealing with the homelessness. You stand a better chance of resolving those if you can actually bring people together. And I know everybody would say that. I just have basically 30 years of trying to do that and learning from people who really taught me how to do it.
Now, one of the biggest issues that occurred with the budget was the property tax increase proposal.
Right.
It was a 19-19 vote. You were one of the no votes.
That's right.
Why did you vote no?
So a couple different reasons. One is that it was such a short time frame in terms of looking at it and trying to figure out what was going on. A lot of the members of the public didn't even know we were voting on it. Typically, you do a property tax increase during a reassessment year. This was not a reassessment. So there were lots of members of the public that had no idea we were voting on it, and that's a problem. Second, we did a reassessment last year. So a lot of people got hit with a tax increase, even though it's just a reassessment. We were going to hit them twice. The third reason was that the council, members of the council spent about 4.5 hours one evening trying to figure out how to cut. What could we cut in the budget to try to start making up the difference in that shortfall that we had? $57 million shortfall we started with. The council, unfortunately, could only come up with about $70,000 of cuts that we could actually agree to. Look, we passed the budget. Councils, that's the most important function of the council. We passed that budget. So we're responsible for that budget. We're responsible for last year's budget. If there were things in there that we needed to cut, then we had to do the job of cutting. And when we really couldn't come up with hardly anything to cut, then it was really hard for me to vote for a 50-cent property tax increase that would basically be fixing our problems on the backs of taxpayers. There was no in between. We either had a status quo or a 50-cent property tax increase. We didn't have time to talk about anything in the middle. That's one of the things compromise should be. You bring people together. But at that point, we have an affordability problem here, and I was worried about what it was going to do to, particularly to some of our lower-income residents.
Now, if you're elected vice mayor, how do you see your relationship with the mayor?
Yeah. So the mayor and I go back a long time, so that's a good thing. Some people might think it's a bad thing because then it's like, well, you're just going to do the same thing. No, the mayor and I agree on many things, and we disagree on many things. Part of the idea is just to keep the conversation moving. You want to have good open access of communication between the two offices. And one of the most important things I think the vice mayor should do is understand what the issues are, what's happening in the city, what does the mayor know, what are the things that the mayor knows that should be presented to the council as a body. And there are going to be some things that are brought from council members that come in that need to be passed into the mayor's office. So I think one of the main things that the vice mayor should do is make sure those lines of communication stay open, whether it's with the mayor or people in the mayor's office, and really make sure that there's that really strong flow of communication both ways. Because, I mean, in the end, we're all in this to make the city better. We're not in it to fight with each other. We're in it to figure out what are the problems, what are the issues, and how do we solve them. And we have to solve them together.
So last year I wrote a column early in 2017 saying that short-term rentals would be the most contentious issue of the year, and I think maybe I was right. Maybe.
I think maybe you were right.
And you had a very tough responsibility. You were in charge of the process to come up with a compromise. Tell us a little bit about what did you learn from that process, and does that inform how you might lead the council if you're elected as vice mayor?
Yeah, some people might say that's why I'm running for vice mayor. I was the chair of the committee designed to come up with a resolution. So I had not been really that engaged in that issue. There were about 10 members of the council that were. But Vice Mayor Briley at the time asked me if I would oversee this committee to look at trying to come up with a compromise, which was really designed to come up with a solution so the legislature, the General Assembly, wouldn't override us, so that the city controlled what happened with short-term rental properties. So we had like 10, 11 meetings in the public. We actually, at the last meeting, we actually drafted a piece of legislation right in front of everyone, so they were all open. We let everyone talk. We listened. We learned. But a very antagonistic issue. People had locked down on both sides. And so trying to bring them together was very difficult. And in the end, we really couldn't bring people together. And very frustrated by that process, because in the end, the legislature did pass a law and tell us that we couldn't do what we wanted to. So we spent a lot of time working on short-term rental property. There was a bill that we passed, and then the legislature said, overturn that ability to pass that bill. We have to go back to the time where we can all talk together, that civil discourse part. So, you know, whether you blame Washington for it or what, I mean, you watch what's going on in Washington. They can't seem to get along, or they can't agree to things. We have to be able to work together. And as vice mayor, that's what I would concentrate on. We got to bring the sides together when we have differing opinions, and we got to work together to find a solution.
Now, we've elected there'll be another election come August of 2019.
That's right.
Every single council race will be up. Got a mayor's race. How do you keep people's focus on what matters during a time like that?
Good question. So I'm running on 3 platforms, really. One is the civil discourse, okay? 2 is that a couple of weeks ago we had a kind of a retreat by the council, and so one of the things I did was pass out 2 cards, index cards. And the first one was, if this council were to end today, what would we be known for? We've got all kinds of different answers. The other index card was in August of next year, when the council term really does end, what do we want to be known for? So what you do is you take the 3 most important issues, or the 4 or 5 most important issues, which were on that sheet, including things like affordable housing, and then you refocus the council. You know, because we do get busy. I mean, obviously, if you look at our agendas, I think the last one was 18 pages long. All right, so a lot of stuff going on, a lot of information coming in and out, a lot of bills, a lot of zoning measures coming in. But each council term has a limited amount of time to actually achieve the things that it wants to achieve. So I think the idea is you go back to that list, and you bring the council members together, you bring the committees together, and you go, okay, so, you know, if affordable housing obviously is on the list, what is the goal? What is obviously that's the issue. What do we want to do between now and the end of this term. And I will tell you, it can't be another study. We've studied this thing over and over again. You can always have people looking at it, but it has to be, affordable housing has to mean actual units or home modifications or actual construction. It has to be dealing with the problem. It has to be fair wages. It has to be looking at it and then figuring out and taking steps to actually start dealing with the issue. Enough talk. We actually have to have goals in place. And then the idea is between now and the end of the term, it's actually to try to hit those goals. Mm-hmm. And you do that on every issue. And I think you can do it. There are great members of the council, and the Affordable Housing Task Force has been meeting. They're trying. But we got 1 year left on this term, and we need to achieve. We need to get results. We need to figure out what it is that we want to achieve, get people on board, and then go get it done.
So I'd love to ask you, what did you put on your note card? What will you be known for?
So affordable housing was one. I think a transit discussion was the second one. So obviously we can't put a referendum back on, but we have traffic problems out there. When we ran for office 3 years ago, it was overdevelopment, Nashville growing too fast, which meant affordable housing was at risk, and it was traffic congestion. Not necessarily developing a giant transit plan, which was important, but it was dealing with the traffic flows. And so whether it was coming up I-24 or going up I-65 or getting stuck trying to get onto those things from Nashville, it was all designed to deal with current traffic congestion. And so whether you go back and make sure traffic lights are synchronized, I mean, I'm sure that people have been sitting at lights watching nobody move from left to right as you're sitting there, and you're going like, there are 30 cars backed up, and why are the traffic lights not synchronized? Making sure they're synchronized, figuring out if there are more right-hand turns that we should do, looking at the traffic patterns and figuring that stuff out. We can do this. We just have to figure out where are those congested areas. I'm sure most of the viewers can probably tell you where they are, and then figuring out what to do. The third thing that I think I put on the list was homelessness. Mm-hmm. I'm a big advocate for Metro. We have a number of buildings in the city for opening a building during the cold, and maybe we should do it during the summer, but when it gets 32 degrees or below, and we have Metro buildings that are heated, and we have people outside that are freezing, we need to open those doors and bring them in. And there are concerns about resources and whatever, but if we can't if we can't meet the basic needs of our citizens, then we need to get our priorities straight.
Since you mentioned homelessness, there's a proposal to do a land swap with Tony Giarratana. Mm-hmm. That would give him the church park
That's
land,
right.
and with $25 million, and also in exchange along James Robertson Parkway, there would be a new place for homelessness. Do you have a position on that particular project?
So the position right now would be need to talk to homeless advocates and figure out if it really works. So whenever you start looking at more units, that's a really, really good thing. Okay, so I think the last time I heard it was maybe 100 units. And the bottom two floors, if we did this, would be used for services. But there's some really strong advocates out there. If it's Room in the Inn, Open Table Nashville, a lot of independent groups that represent the homeless. I really want to hear from them. Is this a good thing or not? And then the second part would be, losing green space in front of the library. Obviously, that's where a lot of people do stay and use the library as for resources. I really want to know more. I really want to talk to people more. We haven't really seen all the details. We just heard about it. So I would want to know more before I made that decision. But I would say that I'm a big homeless advocate, and I really want to know where they stand before I would make a decision.
And before we conclude, any final words?
This has been an interesting, quick race. That happens every so often. The nice thing about quick races are that they're quick. So, you're out there meeting lots of people. That's one of the great things about elections and campaigning is that you do go out and see the city. And if you do it right, you get to see places that you've never been to before, and you get to meet lots of people, and you get to hear from folks. And so while it may be tiring during the summer heat to go out there and knock on doors and go to events and things like that, in the end, you learn so much more about Nashville and Nashvillians, and that's what I like. And obviously, appreciate. I really do want people to vote, whether they vote for other people or me. It doesn't matter. But this is, one of the great things in a democracy is having the right to vote. And I heard initially that those numbers coming in early voting were not all that big. People should exercise their right to vote. That's important.
That's a great message to end on. Councilman Jim Shulman, thank you so much for
Sure.
running for Vice Mayor of Metro Nashville. Early voting is ongoing at this moment, and the election is on August 2nd, so whether you vote early or on Election Day, please go vote. And thank you very much.